What happens when one of Hollywood's toughest action stars loses his cool on daytime television and everything spirals out of control? It only took 29 seconds for this interview to go from friendly conversation to absolute chaos, and what you're about to hear will shock you. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, hit that subscribe button right now. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, and after you hear what went down on Tamron Hall's show last night, you'll want to catch every single upload we post. Last night's episode of the Tamron Hall show featured Jason Statham as a guest, there to promote his latest action thriller and discuss his long career as one of Hollywood's most reliable action heroes. The British actor walked onto the set with his characteristic cool confidence, shaking hands with Tamron and settling into the guest chair with that laid-back demeanor he's known for. The opening segment went smoothly. Tamron welcomed Jason warmly, complimenting his new film and asking about the intense stunts he performed. The audience applauded enthusiastically as clips from his latest movie played on the screens behind them, showing explosive car chases and brutal fight sequences that had become his trademark. Jason, as always, was humble and professional, talking about his commitment to doing his own stunts whenever possible, and the rigorous training regimen he maintains to stay in peak physical condition even as he gets older. His dedication to authenticity in action sequences had become legendary in the industry. People don't realize how much work goes into these films, Jason said in his distinctive gravelly voice, his British accent adding weight to every word. It's not just showing up on set and throwing punches at the bad guys. There's months of preparation beforehand, learning choreography, working closely with stunt coordinators to make everything look real and feel dangerous while keeping everyone safe. Every punch, every kick, every fall is planned down to the second. Tamron nodded enthusiastically, clearly impressed and genuinely interested in his process. You've been doing this for over 2 decades now, and you're still performing stunts that would put men half your age in the hospital. What keeps you motivated? What makes you keep pushing your body to these extreme limits year after year? Jason leaned back in his chair, considering the question thoughtfully and carefully, taking his time to formulate his response. I love what I do. I genuinely love the challenge of it all. I love that audiences still respond to practical action, real stunts, real physicality that they can feel through the screen. In an age where everything can be done with CGI and computers, where you can create anything digitally, there's something special and irreplaceable about knowing what you're watching actually happened on set. That someone really jumped from that building or really drove through that explosion. The conversation flowed naturally and easily as they discussed his career trajectory, from his early days as a competitive diver representing England to his transition into modeling and eventually breaking into Hollywood through Guy Ritchie's crime films. Jason shared funny behind-the-scenes stories from his various film sets, talked about working with different directors and their unique styles, and expressed genuine gratitude for the opportunities he'd been given over the years. I never take any of this for granted, Jason said seriously. I know how lucky I am to still be doing this at my age, to still be getting these roles, to still have audiences who want to see me in these films. It's a privilege, truly. Tamron brought up his collaborations with various action stars throughout his career, asking about the camaraderie among actors in the genre, and whether there was competition or support between them. Jason spoke warmly about his friendships with fellow action heroes, the mutual respect they shared for each other's work, and how they pushed each other to deliver better and more authentic performances. There's a real brotherhood in what we do, Jason explained, his expression softening as he talked about his colleagues. We understand the risks involved, the dedication it takes, the physical and mental toll it takes on your body and your family life. When you're working with someone who gets that, who's willing to put in the same work you are, who respects the craft the way you do, it elevates everything. The chemistry is better, the action is better, the whole film is better. He told a story about a particularly dangerous stunt that went slightly wrong, and how his co-star immediately stopped production to make sure he was okay, refusing to continue until safety protocols were reviewed. The audience laughed at his self-deprecating humor about limping around set for days afterward, but insisting he was fine. For about 2 minutes, the interview was exactly what both parties had expected and wanted: professional, engaging, entertaining, and full of interesting insights into the life of an action star. The studio audience was clearly enjoying every moment, laughing at Jason's dry British humor and his deadpan delivery, leaning forward during his more intense stories about close calls on set and the injuries he'd sustained over the years. Tamron then shifted gears slightly, her expression becoming more thoughtful and serious, her body language changing from relaxed to focused. Jason, I want to talk about something that's been a major topic of discussion in Hollywood lately. Something that I think is really important to address. There's been a lot of conversation about representation in action films, particularly about who gets to be the hero, who gets to save the day, who gets cast in these leading roles. As someone who's been the face of so many action franchises over the years, what are your thoughts on the push for more diversity in these kinds of roles? Jason nodded, seemingly unbothered by the question at first. I think it's great, honestly. The more stories we can tell from different perspectives and different backgrounds, the better it is for everyone. Action films should reflect the world we live in, and that world is diverse and multicultural. I've got no problem with that at all. I think it's long overdue, actually. That's good to hear, Tamron said, but there was something in her tone, something subtle but noticeable, that suggested she wasn't quite satisfied with that answer. But don't you think there's been a sort of monopoly on these roles over the years? That certain types of actors, certain demographics, have dominated the action genre for decades, while others have been systematically shut out or relegated to supporting roles? Jason's expression shifted slightly, just a flicker of something, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his posture as he sat up a bit straighter. I wouldn't call it a monopoly exactly. I'd call it casting directors choosing who they think is right for specific roles based on a lot of different factors. That's how the business works, right? You audition, you prove you can do the job, you show you have the physicality and the charisma, and if you're the best fit, you get cast. It's competitive, but it's not a conspiracy. But isn't that process inherently biased? Tamron pressed forward, her journalist instincts clearly kicking in now, not letting him off the hook. When the people making those decisions have certain preconceived notions about what an action hero should look like, about what heroism looks like, doesn't that create barriers for actors who don't fit that traditional mold? Doesn't that perpetuate the same limited representation we've seen for decades? Jason shifted in his seat, clearly becoming less comfortable with where this conversation was heading. His easy, relaxed demeanor was starting to fade. Look, I can only speak to my own experience here. I worked my ass off to get where I am. I trained for years, doing martial arts and diving and everything else. I took roles nobody else wanted. The small parts, the background roles. I did my own stunts when other actors wouldn't even consider it. I earned my place in this industry, brick by brick. Nobody's questioning what you've earned, Jason, Tamron said, her voice measured but increasingly firm and pointed. But can you acknowledge that your path to success might have been easier, might have had fewer obstacles, because of certain advantages you had that others didn't? Can you see that your talent and hard work existed within a system that was more likely to give you opportunities? Easier? Jason's eyebrows shot up dramatically, his voice taking on a sharp edge that hadn't been there before. You think my path was easy? You think anything about what I've done was easy? I came from nothing, Tamron. Absolutely nothing. I grew up in a council estate in Shirebrook. My dad was a street seller. My mom was a dancer. I worked construction jobs and sold knockoff jewelry on street corners before I got my break in the industry. I was nearly 30 before I got my first real film role, which is ancient in Hollywood years. Don't sit there and tell me I had it easy. Tamron raised her hands in a placating gesture, but her expression remained serious and unconvinced. That's not what I'm saying, and I think you know that. I'm not talking about your personal economic struggles or your individual journey. I'm talking about systemic advantages, about how Hollywood has historically favored certain demographics over others when it comes to leading roles. Surely you can acknowledge that reality? Jason's jaw tightened visibly, the muscles in his face tensing. What I can acknowledge is that I've spent 20 years breaking my body to entertain people. I've fractured bones, torn ligaments, dislocated shoulders, worked through injuries that would make most people quit and never come back. I've been knocked unconscious, I've had surgeries, I've pushed through pain that would hospitalize normal people. And now you're sitting here implying that I only succeeded because of some nebulous advantage? That's pretty damn insulting, Tamron. That really is. The atmosphere in the studio had completely changed now, transformed in a matter of minutes. The friendly, relaxed energy that had characterized the first part of the interview had been replaced by growing tension that everyone in the room could feel. The audience members were glancing at each other nervously, exchanging worried looks, sensing the confrontation brewing between host and guest like a storm gathering on the horizon. "I'm not trying to insult you," Tamron insisted, but her tone was becoming sharper. "I'm trying to have an honest conversation about representation in Hollywood. Can you honestly say that race hasn't played a factor in who gets cast as action heroes?" "Of course it's played a factor," Jason said, his voice rising. "But that's changing, isn't it? Look at the landscape now compared to 20 years ago. There's way more diversity in action films than there's ever been. But somehow I'm still getting blamed for that history, like I personally kept people out of the industry." "Nobody's blaming you personally," Tamron countered. "But when actors in your position refuse to acknowledge their privilege, it makes it harder to have these necessary conversations about change." Jason stood up abruptly from his chair, the sudden movement causing it to scrape loudly and harshly across the floor, the sound cutting through the tense atmosphere like a knife. His voice boomed across the entire studio, filled with frustration and anger. "Privilege? Lady, I grew up in a council estate in the East Midlands. My dad was a street seller, hawking cheap goods. We had nothing. No connections, no money, no opportunities handed to us on a silver platter. I fought tooth and nail for everything I have. I put my body on the line over and over again, risking serious injury every single day. And you want to reduce all of that? All of those years of sacrifice and pain and dedication to privilege? That's absolute bullshit. And you know it. That completely dismisses everything I've worked for." Tamron also stood, rising to her full height and matching his energy completely, refusing to be intimidated. "Your personal struggle and hardship don't negate the fact that Hollywood has systematically favored white male action stars for decades, Jason. Those two things can both be true at the same time. You can have worked incredibly hard and also have benefited from a system that gave you more opportunities than it would have given to someone who looked different. Why is that so hard for you to admit? Why can't you hold both of those truths simultaneously? Because you're making it sound like I didn't earn what I have." Jason's voice was loud now, echoing through the studio and bouncing off the walls. "You're making it sound like I was just handed these roles because of how I look, like I didn't have to prove myself over and over again. That's complete crap. I auditioned against hundreds of other people. I competed. I showed I could do things other actors couldn't or wouldn't do. I was better than the other people going for those parts. That's why I got them. Not because of some systemic advantage. Better, or just more aligned with what Hollywood executives think an action hero should be." Tamron shot back, without missing a beat, not backing down an inch. "There are incredibly talented actors of color, actors with amazing physical abilities and charisma, who have been passed over for roles that went to people with half their ability, simply because they didn't fit the traditional image of what a hero looks like. You can't deny that's happened." Jason pointed at her, his frustration visibly boiling over, his face flushed with anger. "Then take that up with the executives. Take it up with the casting directors. Take it up with the studio heads who make those decisions. Don't sit here and attack me like I'm the problem. like I personally kept people out of the industry. I'm just an actor trying to do my job as well as I can. I didn't create the system, and I sure as hell don't control who gets cast in what roles. But you benefit from it, Tamron pressed, her voice firm and unwavering. And when you refuse to acknowledge that, when you get defensive and angry instead of listening and trying to understand, you become part of the problem, whether you mean to or not. Your defensiveness is part of the problem. Jason let out an incredulous, bitter laugh that had no humor in it whatsoever. This is unbelievable. This is absolutely unbelievable. I came here to talk about my film, to share some stories, to connect with your audience. And instead I'm getting lectured about privilege and systemic racism like I'm some kind of villain in your narrative. You know what? Maybe I should just shut up and listen to you tell me how everything I've accomplished, every sacrifice I've made, every injury I've sustained, is actually just luck and advantage. And having the right skin color, right? Is that what you want to hear? That's not what I'm saying. Tamron's voice rose to match his, her own frustration becoming evident. But your defensiveness right now, your refusal to even consider what I'm saying, is proving exactly what I'm talking about. You can't even have a conversation about systemic issues without taking it as a personal attack on your character and your work. That's the problem. That's what prevents progress. Because it is a personal attack, Jason shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. You're sitting here telling me I didn't really earn what I have, that I only got where I am because of privilege and systemic advantages. How is that not personal? How is that not insulting and dismissing everything I've worked for, everything I've sacrificed? My marriages suffered. I missed my kids growing up. I've been in constant physical pain for years, all for this career. And you're telling me it doesn't really count? The production crew was in complete panic now, frantically signaling to each other across the studio floor, trying desperately to figure out whether to cut to commercial or let this explosive confrontation play out. Several producers were on their phones, likely calling executives. The cameras stayed on, however, capturing every heated moment of the confrontation that was rapidly spiraling, completely out of control. I'm trying to have a nuanced conversation about a complex issue, Tamron said, her voice sharp with frustration and exasperation. But you're too busy being defensive and feeling attacked to actually engage with what I'm saying. This is exactly the problem we face when trying to have these conversations. People in positions of privilege never want to examine how they got there, or acknowledge the advantages they had along the way. And people like you never want to acknowledge when someone actually worked for what they have. Jason fired back immediately, his voice shaking with anger. It's always easier to chalk everything up to privilege and systemic this and systemic that. You know what takes real work? Getting up at 5 a.m. every single day to train. Learning how to fight multiple martial arts styles. Learning how to drive cars and motorcycles at high speeds. Learning how to fall off buildings without breaking your neck. Doing take after take after take until you get it exactly right. That's work, Tamron. Real, physical, exhausting, painful work. And black actors can't do that? Tamron challenged sharply. Asian actors can't do that? Latino actors can't do that? Women can't do that? Is that what you're suggesting? That only white men can handle that kind of work? Jason's face went bright red, his eyes widening with indignation. Don't put words in my mouth. Don't you dare twist what I'm saying. Of course they can do it. That's not what I'm saying at all. And you damn well know it. You're deliberately misrepresenting my point. Then what are you saying? Tamron demanded, her hands on her hips now, her posture aggressive and confrontational. Because right now it sounds like you're saying you worked hard and that's the only factor that matters in your success. And I'm telling you, that's not the whole story. That's an incomplete picture of reality. The whole story is that I sacrificed everything to get here, Jason said, his voice tight with emotion, nearly breaking. Everything, Tamron. I missed birthdays and holidays with my family. I trained until I literally could barely stand up. I took hits and falls that left me bruised and battered for weeks at a time. I did everything that was asked of me. And more. Way more. And yes, I'm proud of that. I'm incredibly proud of what I've built, from nothing. And I'm not going to apologize for it. And I'm not going to feel guilty about succeeding just because you think I should, based on your political views. Nobody's asking you to apologize for succeeding, Tamron said. Exasperation and disbelief clear in her voice and on her face. We're asking you to acknowledge that the playing field isn't level, that it never has been. That's all. Just acknowledge that simple reality. Fine, the playing field isn't level. Jason threw his hands up in the air dramatically. There, I said it. I acknowledged it. Are you happy now? Hollywood has problems with diversity. It always has. It's been getting better, but it has a long way to go. But that doesn't mean every single person who succeeded in this industry only got there because of their race or gender. Some of us actually had talent and skill and worked our asses off to develop that talent. Nobody said you don't have talent, Tamron countered, her voice firm. Nobody is questioning your ability or your work ethic. But your talent existed and developed in a system that was more likely to give you opportunities, more likely to see your potential, more likely to invest in you than it would be for someone who looked different. Can you really not see that? Can you really not understand that basic fact? Jason grabbed his microphone pack and started unhooking it from his belt with sharp, angry movements. You know what I see? I see someone who invited me on their show under false pretenses, under the guise of talking about my film and my career, and then ambushed me with political accusations disguised as questions. I see someone more interested in making a point and pushing an agenda than actually having a real, genuine conversation. I'm trying to have a real conversation, Tamron insisted. But you're refusing to engage with anything that challenges your worldview. No, you're trying to make me feel guilty for being successful, Jason shot back. You're trying to diminish everything I've accomplished by reducing it to privilege. Well, I'm not playing that game, Tamron. I'm not going to stand here and let you tear down 20 years of hard work just so you can make some political point on your show. One of the producers tried to intervene, stepping forward with hands raised. Maybe we should all just take a breath but Jason cut him off. No, I'm done. I'm not staying here to be insulted and lectured. This is ridiculous. Tamron's expression hardened. If you walk out now, it's just going to prove my point. That when privileged people are confronted with uncomfortable truths, they run away rather than engage. Jason stared at her for a long moment, his jaw working as he clearly struggled to control his temper. You want to know what the truth is, Tamron? The truth is that you don't know anything about my journey. You don't know what I've been through, what I've sacrificed, what I've overcome. You just see a white guy who's been in action movies, and you assume everything was handed to me. That's prejudice too, by the way. Making assumptions about someone based on how they look? Yeah, that cuts both ways. Don't even try to compare your experience to. Tamron started, but Jason interrupted her. I'm not comparing anything to anything, he said, his voice dangerously quiet now. I'm just saying that maybe, just maybe, you don't have the whole picture. Maybe you're so focused on your narrative that you can't see the actual person standing in front of you. Someone who came from nothing and built something through sheer determination and sacrifice. And I'm saying that determination and sacrifice matter, but they're not the only factors, Tamron said firmly. Plenty of people work just as hard as you and never get the same opportunities. That's the reality of systemic inequality. Jason shook his head slowly. We're just going in circles. You've decided what you think about me, and nothing I say is going to change that. So I'm leaving. This interview is over. He pulled the microphone completely off and set it on his chair with deliberate care, his movements controlled and final despite his obvious anger. Tamron took a step toward him, her hand outstretched as if to stop him or reason with him. Jason, wait. We can continue this conversation like adults. Like professionals. Adults don't ambush their guests, Jason said coldly. his voice like ice. Adults don't invite someone on their show just to attack them and make them defend their entire life and career. You had your agenda from the start, Tamron. This was never about my film or my career or having a genuine discussion. This was about you making a political statement, about you looking good for your audience by taking down someone you see as representing privilege. Well, congratulations. You got your moment. You made it. If you're feeling attacked, maybe that says something about your own guilt and your own blind spots, Tamron said. And there was a definite edge to her voice now that hadn't been there before, a sharpness that cut through the tension. Jason's eyes flashed with pure anger, his entire body tensing. My guilt? I have nothing to feel guilty about. Absolutely nothing. I worked for everything I have. Every single thing. And I'm not going to let you or anyone else make me feel bad about that. Make me feel like I need to apologize for being successful. This conversation is over. We're done here. He turned and started walking toward the exit, his stride purposeful and determined, every step radiating anger and disappointment. Tamron called after him, seemingly unable to help herself, unable to let him have the last word. Running away doesn't change the truth, Jason. It doesn't change the reality of how Hollywood works. Jason stopped abruptly, his whole body going rigid. He turned back one final time, his expression a mixture of anger, frustration, and genuine disappointment. The truth is, you wasted an opportunity for a real conversation here. You could have actually talked to me about these issues in a meaningful way. You could have asked genuine questions and listened to genuine answers without judgment. Instead, you attacked, you accused, you judged me from the start. And now you're surprised that I'm leaving? That's on you, Tamron. Not me. That's entirely on you. With that final statement, he pushed through the heavy studio door with force and was gone, leaving Tamron standing alone on the set, the audience sitting in stunned and uncomfortable silence, and the cameras still rolling, capturing every uncomfortable second of the aftermath that hung in the air like smoke. The interview that should have been a straightforward promotional appearance had become one of the most explosive confrontations in daytime television history, all because a conversation about representation turned into a battle neither participant was willing to lose.